Hey, how about that? Two Seattle teams winning in the same night. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Mariners do win 5-4 over the Guardians. Have to make sure I get that right. But the reason for this video, the Kraken win 4-2 over San Jose in San Jose, a place where they seem to get shut out in embarrassing fashion the first time they go there, and then take care of business the second time. Now, with that being said, this game was in some ways embodied, weirdly enough, by the empty net goal at the end of it for Jared McCann, in that it was not the prettiest ever, but it got the job done. Now with that, I am going to get right to the lineup and get through the game relatively quickly. This might be on the shorter end of R&Rs, as you might have seen in my community post about why there wasn't a power rankings for the second straight week. I really tried not to miss those. I did, unfortunately, end up getting food poisoning over the weekend. Actually, got it on Friday and still am not feeling very good from it. Somehow I managed to power through the R&R on Saturday through a mixture of a lot of medicine and what I can only assume is divine intervention. But yeah, not feeling great still. On the uptrend, but we're going to have to get through this one a little bit quicker than I usually would. And if I make some mistakes or leave some things out, please feel free to fill in those blanks down in the comment section below. So then, lineup-wise for the Kraken, we do get two new faces in this game, or maybe I shouldn't say new faces, guys that we haven't seen in quite a while, one of them being Vince Dunn making his return from injury, which it was good to see him back in playing games, even if they're unfortunately not meaningful anymore like they were when he exited due to that injury in Calgary. And then also Shane Wright playing his first game for the Kraken in quite a while, since all the way back in November when he and Winterton came up for those 3 games with the injuries the Kraken were going through at that point in time. And Wright had a fantastic game. He was good in the defensive end and was very noticeable in a good way in the offensive end as well, almost the entire game long. Now, part of that is that he actually got some significant ice time in this game, the most he's had in a single game in his NHL career, which granted is just over 10 games at this point. And that's spanned over a couple seasons, so he hasn't had much consistent play, but the most play he's had in a single game came in this one, and it seemed to make a difference as far as getting him into the flow of the game, and he definitely played better as the game went along. And certainly a large part of the reason for that is that, well, with the Kraken not being in competition for the playoffs anymore, they could afford to send some of the younger guys higher up in the lineup, give them a bigger role in the game to see how they could handle that, especially guys like Wright or Winterton, who they are potentially looking at making that jump to the roster next season. So then Wright slots right into the top 6, centering the second line, or maybe even the first line. They actually got the most ice time as a line together out on the ice of any of the lines. That being said, Wright still got less time than Matty Beniers, who's still centering that same line that he has for the last few games. Normally the Gord line with Tolvanen and Bjorkstrand on either side, but Wright's up there with Schwartz and Eberle on either side of him. And again, assigning numbers 1, 2, and 3, and 4 to Kraken lines is not always the easiest thing to do, because then your third line would be McCann centering Winterton and Burakovsky. Meanwhile, the fourth line then is basically spare parts, which it feels bad to say Yanni Gord is that, but you got Yanni Gord, Cartier, and Tanev as the fourth line. But again, like I said, I wouldn't read into the numbering of those lines too much. They all played as groups within 2 minutes of each other on ice, so basically even amounts of playing time for all 4 lines, regardless of what order you want to put them in. Meanwhile, on the defensive end, Vince Dunn's return does mean that one of the other 6 has to get scratched, which obviously is going to be either Schultz, Dumoulin, or Evans. Now, Evans doesn't make a lot of sense since you're out of the playoffs again, and you kind of want to get him more NHL experience going into next season. So then it's between Dumoulin and Schultz. They end up scratching Schultz, so Evans pairs with Dumoulin. That's kind of the one that makes the most sense to me, with Schultz being on the expiring contract and somewhat unlikely to return, though it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if they kept him and then just ran with scratching either he or Dumoulin next season, probably Dumoulin then as the 7th defenseman. Either way, Evans does seem like he's been kind of brought up to take that spot from Schultz next season, and that's certainly at least what he does for this game, with Dunn rejoining Larson on the top pair, Borgen and Alexiak the second pair, and then Evans and Dumoulin the third. And finally in goal, with the Kraken still going every other game between the 2 goaltenders, this is then a Grubauer start, with Decord having started the last one. Though Grubauer really doesn't have to do much in this game for the first half of the first period. I don't think the Sharks get a shot on goal, in fact, until around the 10-minute mark. Meanwhile, the Kraken do get a shot on goal within the first 30 seconds, and it's into the back of the net. As the Kraken get into the offensive end with the Beniers line out there, Tolvanen keeps the puck along the boards, Bjorkstrand eventually getting it back along the boards to Tolvanen. He finds Beniers wide open out by the faceoff dot. Beniers fires off the one-time shot, and it's put perfectly, a bouncing, rolling puck scooped off the ice and fired into the top corner, far side, over the shoulder of Blackwood to give the Kraken the 1-0 lead. And so just like that, even though they lost opening faceoff and actually had the puck down by their goal in the first few seconds, the Kraken still managed to start the game on time, get the puck down to the other end, and score within the first 30 seconds. Beniers getting his 13th of the season and 4th here in just the last little while, as he really has started to heat up here, even picking up some assists along with that. And speaking of assists, on this goal, Tolvanen picks up his 24th of the season, and Bjorkstrand picks up his 2nd on the team, only to Vince Dunn, 32nd assist. And from there, the Kraken really just continue to build off of that, dominating the Sharks, at least in the flow of play over the first half of this period. Like I said, not giving up a shot on goal until right around the 10-minute mark of the period, and creating plenty of grade A scoring opportunities back the other way. McCann has a couple of great chances, but isn't able to bury one. He has one from in tight, right around where Beniers scored his goal, and then gets a breakaway set loose by Winterton. Neither one of those goes in. Eventually, the Kraken do get a second puck to go into the net off the stick of Ty Cartier, but that play was well offside on the part of Brandon Tanev, so it ends up coming back on coach's review. And even if it hadn't come back, it might have gotten challenged for goaltender interference, though there I do think it's Alexiak who gets pushed into the goaltender, so I'm not sure that that would have actually gotten overturned. Doesn't really matter since Tanev is a good couple feet inside the offensive end by the time Cartier pulls the puck across the line. But even in spite of the disallowed goal, the Kraken still do make it 2-0. Just on the other side of the halfway point of the period, it's once again the Beniers line out on the ice with Tolvanen and Bjorkstrand. It's fought for down in the corner by Beniers and a couple of Sharks players. It turns out it is actually a Sharks player who shovels it down along behind the net where Tolvanen's waiting. He gets it up to Bjorkstrand. Bjorkstrand takes just a second, one quick handle of the puck, picks his spot, and fires an absolute perfectly placed seeing eye bullet into the top corner with not much more than a puck's worth of space from where he shot it to get it over the shoulder and into the top corner, also past the mask of Blackwood to give the Kraken the 2-0 lead. Beniers unfortunately not picking up his 100th NHL point here, as again the puck was pushed along by a Sharks player, even if he was fighting for it with Beniers. Beniers doesn't actually touch it there, so it is what it is. Still, Tolvanen picks up his 25th assist, and that line already is responsible for the 2-0 lead. Now, from there, the Sharks do start to push back a little bit. In fact, by the end of the period, I think they'd pretty much evened up shots on goal, and that is helped by a power play that they would get a few minutes later. And in spite of everything that's gone poorly for them all season long, regardless of what you want to look at, their power play at home has been weirdly pretty good. I think on the broadcast they said 6th best power play at home in the NHL, and sure enough, they end up scoring on it. This goal for the Sharks comes in a pretty similar way to the way the Kraken scored in some ways both of their goals, but especially the second one. It's a pass from down behind the goal line, kind of in the corner, up to the low part of the faceoff circle, and then fired on net out to the far corner, kind of like how Beniers scored his goal on a one-time shot, and it makes it 2-1. And just like that, the lead is cut in half. Even for everything the Kraken did well in the first half of the period, the Sharks are back to one good bounce going their way and having this game tied up. Or at least it was that way for a couple of minutes, as not long after, the Kraken are able to slow down that momentum that the Sharks had been building over the couple minutes leading into that power play and then through it. As the right line gets out on the ice, it's Schwartz and Wright that create a breakout through the neutral zone. Schwartz getting it up to Wright for a bit of a 2-on-1 break between he and Eberle. And I say a bit of a 2-on-1. It does start as a 2-on-1, but a couple of Sharks are able to catch up into the play. Either way, Wright gets it across to Eberle. Eberle carries it in. It looks like he's going to shoot with it on his forehand, but the last second passes it back to Wright, and then Wright with his stick on the ice fires the shot through the legs of the lone defender back for the Sharks and into the net, with Blackwood having completely sold to the side of Eberle expecting the shot. It's basically a tap in for Wright. He put himself in the right spot at the right time. No pun intended, but there it is. He picks up his 2nd career NHL goal and his 1st of the season in his 1st game back since November and 4th game of the season on whole. And I gotta say, there's something pretty satisfying, even with everything that's gone poorly for the Kraken this season, and obviously disappointing that they're not going to the playoffs, but it is pretty nice to see both Shane Wright and Matty Beniers scoring in the same period. Just a glimpse of what's to come for the Kraken for many years to come, hopefully. Even with the exciting goal for Wright, though, it's also certainly worth mentioning that with the primary assist on the goal for Jordan Eberle, he picks up his 401st career assist, but importantly, his 700th career point, which is a pretty big milestone to hit. And so with that right goal and a couple more good saves by Grubauer in the waning minutes of this first period, we do get to the first intermission with the Kraken leading 3-1. And for the most part, clearly outplaying the Sharks, even with a couple of lapses here and there. Then as we start the second period, the Kraken get another power play early on, their second of the game. I forgot to mention they'd won early on in the first, just after Beniers scored that goal within the first couple of minutes. So they had a chance to go up 2-0, and the power play actually looked pretty good. They just could not manage to score. In fact, I think one of those two good chances for McCann was on that power play. Either way, they once again are unable to score here early on in the second to extend the lead. And that looks like it might become important, as just a couple minutes after they fail to score on the power play, the Sharks pull back to within 1. The shot does come from way up in the corner up by the blue line, but it is tipped nicely on the way to the net. Grubauer was partially screened as the shot was taken, and ultimately it barely bounces through him off of that tip, over his pad and under his glove to pull the Sharks to within 1 again, like I just said, giving them their second goal, making it 3-2. And then from there, the rest of the second period is relatively uninteresting. There's not a lot else to talk about. No particularly dangerous chances, spectacular saves, and no more goals. Really, the only other thing to mention is that as we go into the third period, the Kraken are going to be on the kill, as they took a penalty in the last few seconds of the second period. Now they're able to kill that all off, not only at the start of the second, but also to start out the third period. So we get into the meat of the third period with the Kraken holding that 1-goal lead, where at the very least, again, in spite of all the things that have gone wrong, when the Kraken enter a third period with a lead, they have gotten at least points in every one of those games. 24-0-4, I think it was, going into this game, in games where they go into the third with a lead. So now they're 25-0-4, I suppose. And the Kraken really do just control this third period the entire way, almost even including the power play that starts out the period for the Sharks. I say control rather than dominate or something like that, because the Kraken pretty much just don't let anything happen in their end of the ice. And while they do get some decent chances the other way, they got a couple pretty good chances to extend the lead over the course of the period. They seem fairly content with just, I don't know if it's practicing or what, doing their best to just defend that lead, and they do it very well up until the final minutes of the period, where eventually, I think it takes until the final minute of the period for the Sharks to get their goaltender pulled. And finally, the Kraken, who have not done it a ton this year, I feel like. I don't actually know what the stat is, but it feels like they've not hit the empty net very much this season. Now, part of that is having the chance to hit the empty net. Either way, they do end up hitting it. Though, like I said way back in the beginning, this is not the prettiest empty net goal you're ever going to see from Jared McCann. In fact, it wasn't even the prettiest transition down the ice in the first place, as the Kraken kind of bobble the puck down the ice. Eventually, Jared McCann does end up with the puck in the offensive end with some open ice and a clear lane to just shoot it right into empty net and call it a night. Instead, though, he decides to do that thing that hockey players will do on occasion, actually pretty frequently, with the empty net, and try to just pass it around to share the points and pad those stats. So McCann, with that empty net, instead tries to pass it across the face of a lone Sharks player to Jaden Schwartz on the other side, who also would have a wide open shot. Instead, he kind of second guesses the pass one too many times and bobbles it, doesn't get it to Schwartz, and almost allows the Sharks player to clear it back out. Eventually, McCann does recover from that, fires the shot on net, and it goes off the post and stays out. Though the good news is both Sharks players that are now in the play overcommit and follow the play past the goal, so McCann picks up the puck that goes off of the post and then puts it into the empty net. Looks a little bit disgusted with himself for how ugly all of that was, and I think mostly disgusted that he wasn't able to get the pass to Schwartz so he could share that pass, or share the points. The point is, it does end up in the net, and the Kraken end up winning 4-2. Beyond what I've already said, there's really not much more to say about this game. In fact, not even a lot of the other teams that the Kraken are kind of in that same little clump with when it comes to draft order played tonight. The only other one would be the Pittsburgh Penguins, who also won their game, so the Kraken don't lose any ground on the Penguins at the very least with this win over the Sharks. Again, it's still nice to see them taking care of business against a team that they really have no business losing to when it comes to talent on the roster, especially when you throw in a Shane Wright and Vince Dunn, especially with Shane Wright playing easily his best game in the NHL. And granted, there's not a ton to pick from, but he definitely looked like he belonged, and maybe part of that was the quality of the opponent. They're, not too much better than some of the AHL teams he's been playing over the course of the season. Still a great game from Wright. He gets his second goal in the NHL, and yeah, I think we can just go right to Kraken 3 stars. Oh, actually, the one other thing I did want to mention, that if you were watching the TV broadcast, which I would imagine most of you probably were with sound, I just got to point out how much of a night the guys on the TV broadcast had. It was very funny to watch. They were just having their own entertainment of their own in the broadcast booth, just having all sorts of side conversations and, the typical shenanigans you've expected from those three. I can't necessarily point a specific thing out, but it was an entertaining night from that group of three guys. I'm sure helped out by, as they put it, tight confines with three people squeezed into that booth and also the radio team right next to them. Either way, a pretty entertaining night, not just from what the Kraken did by winning the game, but also what was being talked about on the broadcast. As for the Kraken 3 stars, those we do move into that. As always, brought to you by patrons on Patreon. If you want to help decide the Kraken 3 stars after every game and help decide the Kraken awards at the end of the season on this channel, you can help support the channel over on Patreon as well. With the 3 stars, the first one, I gotta go with Shane Wright. He wasn't, I think one was mentioned over on Patreon by at least one person, but a fantastic game for Wright. Like I said, easily the most time on ice that he's had in a single NHL game, over 15 minutes, and he earned every one of them. Even outside of the goal, he had a fantastic game, was setting up plays, and looked a lot like the Shane Wright that they've seen in Coachella Valley now for most of the season, and that we kind of expected with the draft hype that he had. As for the other 2 stars, the second star for me has to be Philip Grubauer. He had a pretty good night for the Kraken again, nothing necessarily spectacular in the save category, though he did have some pretty good saves and definitely did bail the Kraken out on a couple of occasions with grade A saves, even if they weren't diving across the crease or anything like that. Still a good night for Grubauer. And then the third star, again, there's any number of guys to choose from. Gord was mentioned a couple of times over on Patreon and had a pretty good night. Also, a bit of a, I don't know if you want to call it sympathy, but took a shot from Vince Dunn right in the midsection. And while they couldn't really see it clearly, let's just say it might be good that he's already had a couple of kids. Either way, Gord, a tough night and toughed it out to play pretty well for the Kraken. Still, my third star, I'm going to go with Oliver Bjorkstrand. Picks up a goal and an assist on the night. Eberle would also certainly be worth mentioning with that 700th NHL point. But 3 stars, I'll go with Shane Wright, first star, Grubauer, second star, and Bjorkstrand, the third. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below, though. If you'd have 3 different stars, totally fair if you would. There's Beniers, obviously, with that goal early on, and pretty close to picking up a second point with the assist. Yeah, let me know what you think down in the comment section. Until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other. God bless, and go Kraken and Mariners.